Hello and welcome. I'm Reshma Shah, a pediatrician, an award-winning author, a mom, and a home cook. And today I'm going to share a simple dinner time solution that's sure to become part of your regular rotation. This meal idea is also a great opportunity to talk about how I like to think about planning and composing a plant-based meal that balances nutrition with enjoyment. This sheet pan dinner is incredibly flexible, allowing you to use whatever ingredients you have on hand, and you can create countless variations. When I think about composing a meal, the basic components that I'm looking to include are a plant-based source of protein, fiber, which is usually going to come in the form of grains, starches, vegetables, and fruits. But the good thing about plant-based sources of protein is that they're often also a good source of fiber, and finally, a healthy source of fat. Plant-based proteins can include things like tofu, tempeh, beans, and veggie meats, but remember, grains can also be a source of protein, and nuts and seeds can add additional protein to your meals. In terms of fiber, grains and starches like barley, rice, and potatoes can help make the meal feel more satisfying and filling. Additionally, vegetables and fruits contain essential vitamins and minerals and often add a bit of color to the meal. And finally, including healthy sources of fat, such as those found in olive oil, avocados, nuts, seeds, nut and seed butters, can help with the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins, enhance flavor, and help with the feeling of satiety. And this sheet pan dinner will include all of these components. I find that sheet pan dinners are a great option for when you don't want to spend a ton of time in front of the stove or cook from a long list of ingredients. In fact, it can be as simple as using 3 ingredients with a little olive oil and some seasonings. The basic idea of a sheet pan dinner is to use a sheet pan to roast a plant-based protein, a starch, and a vegetable. And then you can top it with either a homemade or store-bought dressing or sauce. You can also garnish it with some fresh herbs or additional toppings. For today's sheet pan dinner, I'll be making crispy tofu, Japanese sweet potatoes, roasted broccoli, and a homemade ginger miso sauce. I'll top it off with some fresh herbs, and it's going to be the perfect thing for dinner tonight. If you're making your sheet pan dinner for just yourself or a small group of people, one sheet pan may do the trick. However, if you're making this dinner for a larger group of people, or if you're counting on leftovers, I'd recommend using 2 sheet pans. And the reason for this is that you want to spread your ingredients out in a single layer so that they roast and not steam. So for today's sheet pan dinner, my sweet potatoes are going to take a little bit longer to cook than the rest of my ingredients. So I'm going to start by prepping my sweet potatoes first and get them in the oven. So I've got 2 beautiful Japanese sweet potatoes that I got from the market, and I'm just going to chop them into roughly 1-inch pieces. You can definitely peel the sweet potatoes if you'd like, but I don't mind keeping the skin. Extra nutrients and less work. Sweet potatoes can roll around quite a bit on your cutting board, and so in order to create a safer working surface, I like to create a flat surface that I can do my chopping from. So I'm just going to chop the sweet potato in half, and then put it on its flat side and work from there. You don't have to be too precise with your cuts, but you do want to try to keep them relatively the same size so they cook evenly and are done at the same time. I'm going to take all of my sweet potatoes and transfer them to one of my sheet pans. It works out well because I'll put my sweet potatoes on one tray because they're going to take a little bit longer to roast, and then put my broccoli and tofu on a separate tray. And for the sweet potatoes, I'm going to keep it fairly simple. I'm just going to drizzle a little bit of olive oil on top, and then a generous pinch of salt and some freshly ground black pepper. And I'm just going to toss them together to evenly coat them. And you'll notice that I've lined my baking sheet with a piece of parchment paper. And I like to do this for 2 reasons. First of all, a lot of ingredients like potatoes and even the tofu can stick to the bottom of the pan, and I want to avoid that from happening. And the second reason is when you line a baking tray with parchment paper, it makes cleanup a lot easier. And so I've lined both of my baking trays with just a sheet of parchment paper. All right, I'm going to throw these sweet potatoes into the oven and let them roast. When they're about halfway done, so about 15 to 20 minutes, I'll throw in my broccoli and tofu as well. When I throw my broccoli and tofu, I'm actually going to flip the sweet potatoes. You'll notice that the bottom of the sweet potatoes will become nicely browned and caramelized, and I want to get that same feeling on the other side. So when I put in my broccoli and tofu, I'll make sure to flip the sweet potatoes. So they're going to go into a 400-degree preheated oven, and next I'll prep my broccoli and tofu. I like to put the broccoli sort of upside down and just trim down along each floret. I'm going to try and keep the broccoli mostly to 1/2 of the baking tray so that I have enough room for my tofu. Don't throw out the stems. Let me show you what to do with them instead. I actually find that the stems of the broccoli are really tasty, and using them cuts down on food waste. So to prepare the stems, what I like to do is to cut off this rough part at the end, just kind of chop it off. And then I like to sort of create an even cylinder as much as possible with the rest. You could certainly use a vegetable peeler to peel off the rough parts of the stalk, but for a quick version, I just like to sort of use my knife and go along each surface and just trim away. This rough part is going to be really fibrous and not taste good. So I just take that little bit, trim it off, and then you've got this beautiful tender broccoli stem, and when you roast it, it really brings out the sweetness. So all you do is sort of slice it up, and I'm going to toss it in with my broccoli florets for them to roast. And the same thing with the broccoli. I'm just going to drizzle a little bit of olive oil, a little salt, and a little bit of pepper. Toss to combine and spread it out in a single layer. For today's recipe, I'm using 1 package of extra firm tofu, and I'm actually using a tofu press to press out some of the excess water. And this is my absolute favorite tofu press because it was a gift from my daughter. But if you don't have a tofu press at home, you can either skip the step of pressing the tofu and just pat it dry with a kitchen towel, or you can wrap the tofu in a kitchen towel and then put a slightly heavy weight on it to try and press out some of the tofu. But I find that removing some of the excess moisture in the tofu allows the tofu to maintain its structure a little bit better. And I just want to show you, I don't know if you can see how much water was removed from the tofu. So it's quite a bit of water. So to prep my tofu, I'm just gonna cut it into roughly 1/2-inch cubes. I'm going to slice the tofu down the middle this way, down the middle this way, and then just try to cut it into even cubes. Again, you don't have to be precise about this. I think that cutting them in roughly the same size gives a nice look to the dish, and it also ensures that all of your tofu will cook evenly. So the trick to making this tofu taste delicious and come out nice and crispy is to season it and also to toss it in a little bit of cornstarch. I love the flavor of smoked paprika, but if you don't like smoked paprika, you could use any other spice that you prefer. Maybe a little ground cumin, some chili powder, some oregano, but I like smoked paprika, and so that's what I'm going to use today, just a teaspoon or so. And you also want to season it with a little bit of salt. And I love black pepper, so I add it to pretty much everything. And then you're just gonna gently toss that to combine. You just wanna make sure that it's nice and evenly coated. Next, I'm gonna drizzle just a little bit of olive oil, and this is gonna help the cornstarch to stick to the tofu and help to crisp it up a bit. And then finally, I'm gonna toss in about a tablespoon of cornstarch. And again, just toss that to combine. And that's it. And now the tofu is ready to go on to the baking tray with our broccoli. And again, I like to make sure that they're in, as much as possible, a single layer so they have some space to be able to roast evenly and nicely. Okay, and about halfway through the cooking time, I'm actually going to also toss the broccoli and flip the tofu over, again, just so that the edges are nice and crisp. So the sweet potatoes can take anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes to roast, depending on how large you've cut the chunks, and the broccoli and tofu should take about 25 to 30 minutes. So while my tofu and vegetables are roasting, I'm gonna put together a really simple and delicious miso ginger sauce. And you just may wanna double the recipe, it's that good. You're gonna wanna put it on everything. It'll last in the fridge for several days. So to start, I'm just gonna take a little knob of ginger. It's about a 1/2-inch piece of ginger. And if you remember from my previous video, my favorite way of peeling ginger is to just use a vegetable peeler. This is about a 1/2-inch piece of ginger. You want roughly a tablespoon of ginger. If you like it more gingery, you could certainly add more. And If you like it less gingery, you could add a little less, but I'm using about a 1/2 inch a piece of ginger so that when I mince it, it'll be about a tablespoon. And again, get as much of the brown parts off as you can, but you don't have to be perfect about it. I'm actually gonna use an attachment on my blender and a little mini blender attachment to get a nice creamy consistency. I would not put this in a regular blender because you're not going to have enough volume to really make a nice creamy sauce. So if you don't have a small blender attachment, it's no problem. You can just whisk all the ingredients together in a small mason jar. If you are using the mason jar technique, you want to mince your ginger pretty finely because otherwise you'll have big chunks of ginger in the dressing that you're not going to want. If you're using a small mixer attachment, you can roughly chop the ginger because it's all going to get pureed in the end anyway. So I'm just going to, since I'm using my blender attachment, I'm just going to give it sort of a rough mince. It doesn't have to be really fine, but just to kind of break down the ginger a little bit. All right, so I've got my roughly chopped ginger in my little blender attachment. I'm going to add, this is 2 tablespoons of tahini, 2 tablespoons of yellow miso paste. If you've never used yellow miso paste, it's one of my favorite ingredients to have in the kitchen. It adds so much flavor to sweet dishes, to savory dishes, and I always have yellow miso paste in my fridge. It's that good. And then a tablespoon of maple syrup, a tablespoon of rice wine vinegar, and about 4 tablespoons of water. Start with 4 tablespoons, and then if you feel like you need to thin it out, you can always add more. Now, the miso paste, if you've never worked with it before, is actually quite salty, so this sauce does not require any additional salt. Okay, let's take a look and see what it looks like. So creamy. Honestly, this sauce comes out perfect pretty much every time, but I am just gonna give it a quick taste. You can see how just smooth and creamy it is. The tahini will cause the sauce to thicken over time, so it will get a little bit thicker in consistency than this, but let's just give it a little taste. It's so good. And I think this tastes especially good on top of the sweet potatoes. The other nice thing about these little mini blender attachments is they usually come with their own lid, so you can just screw it on and it's one less thing to clean. You can store it in the refrigerator just like that. One final thing that I wanted to prep, which is totally optional, is some fresh herbs. I think that if you've got fresh herbs on hand, they just add a brightness and a little bit of color and fun to the dish. And so I had some cilantro and I'm gonna just chop it up roughly. And that's it. My sheet pan dinner is roasting away in the oven. I love this relatively hands-off approach to cooking. You could actually prep some of this ahead of time, so you could chop up your vegetables and let your tofu marinate so that when it comes to actually putting things together at dinner time, all you have to do is lay everything out on the sheet pan. And now I am going to clean up the kitchen and we'll take a taste together once everything's out of the oven. Okay, my sweet potatoes are actually at their halfway point, and I wanted to show you just how beautifully caramelized the sweet potatoes can get. So I'm gonna flip them over so that they're caramelized on the other side as well. And this is gonna taste just delicious with our ginger miso sauce. Okay, I actually couldn't wait to give this a try. I started eating it as I was plating it. And I just want to point out some of the components that we talked about. This dish has the plant-based protein from our crispy tofu. It's got loads of fiber from the broccoli, the sweet potatoes, and even the tofu has fiber. And of course, healthy fats from our olive oil that we tossed our vegetables in and the tahini in our ginger miso sauce. I also wanted to point out these broccoli stems. They roasted up so nicely. They're so sweet and tender. And so I'd really encourage you not to throw out your broccoli stalks. I hope that you give this sheet pan dinner a try. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you have any questions or suggestions for future videos, leave a comment below. And if you'd like to see more plant-based recipes and nutrition and cooking tips, make sure to like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.